Alright, so I'm going to be talking about sustainable forestry. So the importance of forests can't really be overstated because we fully depend on them to survive. First things first, forests have a massive impact on the economy. Overall, forest-based products comprise about 1.5% of the total US economy and contribute about 5% of total manufacturing output in the country. Furthermore, the forest products sector is one of the top 3 contributors to most southern state economies. Additionally, around 300 million people actually live in forests, and 10 million people are directly employed by forest management or conservation, and approximately 1.6 billion people rely on forests in some extent, no matter how removed, for their livelihoods. Besides providing jobs and homes for humans, forests also supply habitats for animals and plants, as around 80% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity exists within forests. Forests can also influence regional weather patterns. For example, the Amazon rainforest generates atmospheric conditions that affect rainfall in North America. They also prevent flooding and reduce soil loss and property damage by slowing the flow during rainstorms. Last but not least, forests help to mitigate climate change by storing carbon, providing fuel substitutes, and fixing nitrogen. Despite all of this, we're killing forests at an astounding rate. Last year, we lost 18.7 million acres of forest, which is equal to about 27 soccer fields every minute. And the leading cause of deforestation is agriculture, although some infrastructure is also emerging as a major issue. All in all, forests cover nearly a third of all land on Earth, and we simply can't afford to lose them. And this is kind of what brings us to sustainable forestry. So sustainable forest management, or sustainable forestry, means using and caring for forests in a way that actively meets the needs of humans while also protecting forests for the future. So sustainable forestry is often referred to as a balancing act, as it's extremely difficult to find a happy middle ground between protecting forests and also meeting human need, especially in a world where few people are willing to change their habits and lifestyle in order to help the earth. Additionally, sustainable methods are not the same everywhere, and each community needs to find what works best for them in their forest. So there are tons and tons of different types of sustainable forestry that are being practiced right now all over the world. For the sake of time, I'm only going to focus on one, which is selective logging. So selective logging is a huge practice in sustainable forestry, and what happens is you harvest certain trees from the forest instead of clear cutting, removing all of the trees at once. So this means cutting down only some trees while saving the young trees and some healthy older ones to hold soil and provide seed for the future. Theoretically, selective logging is supposed to preserve the balance of the forest and maintain its valuable assets by slowly lessening the density instead of taking it out all at once, but this doesn't really follow through. So on the surface, the logic behind selective logging makes sense. Take some of the trees, but not all of them, so the forest doesn't end up changing that much. However, that's a misconception. It doesn't really work that way. First off, because selective logging requires a significant amount, like more space between each tree that's getting cut down, as opposed to clear cutting, where it's a small amount of space and you're cutting down every tree, a larger area is inevitably affected by logging companies. Tractors and skidders rip up the soil and forest floor, and loggers also build makeshift dirt roads to get in. Those frontier roads then become larger and larger as more people move in, which then feeds the destruction process. So second, cutting down one tree doesn't just hurt that one tree. On an average, for every one tree removed, up to 30 more can be severely damaged by the timber harvesting operations. Also, as trees are thinned, light penetrates the understory and dries out the forest floor, which makes it much more susceptible to burning, which is a huge environmental concern. A study on plots of land in Sierra Leone and Ghana also found that as particular trees were removed by selective logging, the forest saw a 50% loss in tree diversity and 60% in biomass. Third, when a trunk of a tree is removed, the crown, wood debris, and vines that are left behind decompose, release carbon dioxide gas into the atmosphere. Additionally, sawmills often have an efficiency level of only 30 or 40%, so large amounts of sawdust and scrap also decompose into atmospheric CO2 even after leaving the forest. According to one study, an estimated 400 million tons of carbon enter the atmosphere every year from just in the Amazon due to clear cutting, but another 100 million tons is produced by selective logging, which is enough to potentially alter climate change forecasts for the future on a global scale. Apart from selective logging, there are also many other approaches to sustainable forestry. For example, replanting, where when a tree is harvested, a new sapling is planted in its place. This method is supposed to ensure that the forest is being restored to its original state, but often causes issues with biodiversity and changes in habitats. Enrichment planting is when you replant indigenous tree species by planting seeds or seedlings for the future harvest to increase the economic value of the forest without, theoretically, lowering biomass. And then third, ecotourism, which earns money by showing visitors the natural beauty of a forest without having to cut any trees or damage the environment, and raises awareness for forest health in the hope that people will change their habits. However, despite all of the approaches that individuals and groups are taking to practice sustainable forestry, solving the deforestation problem is a bit more complex than protecting biodiversity and raising awareness. The largest force behind deforestation are the livestock and agriculture industries, who require a massive amount of space in order to be profitable. This kind of leads me to my point, which is that while sustainable forestry is important, if perhaps a bit flawed right now, in order to actually keep forests healthy and full, we need to rethink the way that we approach other non-sustainable industries like agriculture. Sustainability doesn't come from solving half the problem. It requires systematic changes in the way that we, as humans, use the earth.